Yogis and Yoginis, Ashley Josephine here. Today I want to share with you the story of crow and crane. So you may be familiar with the yoga postures crow and crane. People are less familiar with crane. You might have heard both words, and you might think that they are two names of one single yoga posture. And that is not true. Crow and crane are different yoga postures. A lot of times yoga instructors call out crow, and in fact the posture that you take or the yoga instructor shows you is really the posture crane. It's not really that big of a deal, but it is an issue of language. And the posture looks different. There are some subtleties to it. And there are qualitative difference to the posture, and that's what I really want to share with you today. So where did these postures come from? Where did we get the posture crow, and where did we get the posture crane? Well, there's two different yogic texts that we can trace the crow and the crane to. The Mahabharata, which is an Indian epic and is a seminal text in Indian philosophy, gives us the story of the crane, and the supreme yoga Yogi Vashista, which is a Vedanta text, a Vedanta philosophy, and another yogic text, gives us the story of Basudha the crow. Going back to language for a moment, in Sanskrit, Bakasana, Baka means crane, and so Bakasana is crane pose. Kakasana is crow. Kaka in Sanskrit means crow. So the next time if you are a yoga instructor you call out Bakasana, make sure that you're doing crane, and if you are calling crow, the Sanskrit word is Kakasana. Kaka. Alright, let's start with crow first, because that seems to be the posture that gets called most frequently. So we are in the Yoga Vashista, and we're meeting Basudha, the crow. And Basudha is a crow that has lived forever. He is said to live on a magic tree on Mount Meru, which is a mythical mountain located at the North Pole in Hindu mythology. And Basudha is revered among all the gods and the sages, because he is known to be this never-dying crow. And when we think about crows, we think about these birds that are very hardy and they never die. Basudha is living on this tree, and Vashista wants to go meet Basudha and ask Basudha, what have you done to basically achieve immortality? And he asks Basudha to tell his story, and Basudha basically teaches Vashista all of these different philosophical tenets that he's used to achieve this sense of immortality. And the qualities that Basudha the crow talks about are things like finding equanimity and releasing all attachments and all aversions. In Sanskrit, we know these as the kleshas, raga and dvesha, an aversion to painful experiences and attachment to desire and pleasurable experiences. So if we can release all of those aversions and all of those pleasures and maintain a sense of equanimity, Basudha says this is the secret to a long, healthy, immortal life. Basudha also shares in this story a lot about pranayama, and specifically a pranayama practice that involves kumbhaka, or the suspension and the retention of the breath at the beginning of the inhale, at the end of the inhale, at the beginning of the exhale, and at the end of the exhale. Basudha talks about the pranavayus, the different life force energies that swirl through the body. Basudha introduces the idea of chakras, and he talks about 3 chakras, with the heart chakra actually being the center chakra from which all prana and life force emanates. And he basically tells Vashista how to do a particular pranayama practice and emphasizes how important it is to be aware of the breath constantly, to stay present with the breath, and to contemplate the breath and the suspension of the breath, where the breath begins, where the breath ends. And if we do this, then we will know ourself, and once we know our true self, then we will achieve this sense of equanimity and this sense of immortality, this sense of enlightenment. So when we think of the posture crow, kakasana, remember kaka is the Sanskrit word for crow, we think of this sense of equanimity, being attached to nothing, staying present, not thinking about the future or thinking about the past. So let's look at kakasana, crow pose. My little saying is crow is low. Our crow pose, we're going to stay low to the ground. We're going to spread out our knees wide. Those knees are symbolic of the wings. When you think of a crow flying, it almost looks like it's suspended in space sometimes, as it kind of goes back and forth and allows the wind to carry it. So our wings are wide, we're flying, and we have this sense of equanimity looking out at the horizon. We are not worried about what's going to happen in the future, and we're not worried about what's happened in the past. We're equally balanced on our hands so that we can fly and float on our hands, on the ground. And we're going to think about the breath. Think about the breath beginning from the heart and expanding outward, the exhale coming out and back in. This constant move of breath in and out. Think of a magnetic field around the body that also includes this sense of prana, this sense of life force, your energy, your vitality. This is the quality of crow, kakasana, as told by Basunda in the Yogi Vashista. So, I think it's easiest to get into crow kakasana from malasana, a frog squat, a yogi squat. Stay low, bring your hips low to the ground here. If you want to open the hips, if you need to do a little bit of warm up to open the hips, I absolutely recommend that. You can use the elbows to press the legs out. Engage the core and press the palms down on the ground about shoulder width apart. Now, this is really more about finding a sense of balance in the body, that equanimity, than it is about really trying to effort yourself into the posture with muscle. Think about releasing all of that, releasing the attachments, releasing the fear, and instead floating and trusting in that equanimity and that faith. The hands are down on the ground, the knees stay wide. Press the legs into the outside of the triceps and the triceps back out into the legs. Lift up onto the toes and bring the weight forward into the hands. Make sure that your elbows are bent and your your triceps create a bit of a shelf. From there, with the core engaged and the breath equal and you're aware of the breath, the knees stay wide, the back stays long, the hips and the shoulders stay in line with one another and the gaze is down and out. Continue to breathe and stay low here, and this is kakasana crow. And from here we can play with some of these pranayama breath practices once we get comfortable being able to float in crow. So you may have seen crow, kakasana, before, you may have not. Crow is low. Stay low to the ground, hips and shoulders stay level, and the knees stay really wide. You can pause this, try and get into that posture, and then come back. And now we'll go into crane. So, now we've got the Mahabharata. So, the Pandava brothers are 5 brothers that are exiled from their kingdom, and they are exiled for 12 years. And while they're in exile, they are sitting around doing a whole lot of nothing. And they one day come upon this sage who is doing his sacrifices in the forest, and a magic deer came by and happened to steal his fire-making utilities, and this sage runs to the Pandava brothers in the forest and says, help me, I can't make my fire to perform my sacrificial rites. Can you chase after this deer and get my fire kindling materials back? The Pandava brothers say, of course, and they run after this magic deer. They don't know that the deer is magic, and they can't find it, and they get lost in the forest. They're super thirsty, and Yudhishthira, who's the eldest of the brothers, says to one of his brothers, climb up this tree and see if you can go find some water. I'm super thirsty. So the brother climbs up the tree and he looks out and he sees off in the distance this big pool of water with tons of cranes sitting in it. And he says, I found it, and Yudhishthira, the eldest, sends this brother to go fetch them all some water. And the brother goes off into the forest, and he finds the pond, and he is overcome by incredible thirst, and he jumps into the pond to collect all of this water, and all of a sudden he hears this strange voice. And the voice says, do not drink the water, this is my pond, you must answer my questions first, and then I will give you permission to drink the water. And the brother disregards this voice. He's not sure where it's come from, and he's like, who does this person think they are? I'm super thirsty, I'm going to drink the water. And he drinks the water and he falls dead. And a little while later, Yudhishthira, back in the forest, wonders where his brother is and sends his next brother out to the pond to go see what happened. And the next brother goes out and he finds the pond, and at the pond he finds his brother lying dead. And he becomes overcome by grief and sadness, but also an incredible thirst, and he jumps in the water to drink the water. And this voice appears and says, do not drink the water, your brother did that and died. You answer my questions, I'll let you drink the water. The brother doesn't listen, he drinks the water, he falls dead. This keeps happening. All the brothers do the exact same thing until Yudhishthira is left in the forest all by himself, wondering what's happened to his brothers, and decides to go out and find the brothers in the water. He gets to the pond and he sees all of his brothers dead, and he's overcome by incredible grief and sadness, and he doesn't understand what's happened. He sees all of his brothers dead, but he doesn't see any marks. He doesn't see that they've obviously been killed by any type of trauma, and there's no tracks anywhere, so it doesn't appear that anybody came and hunted them down and killed them, so he can't understand how they died. And all of a sudden he's overcome by an incredible amount of thirst, and he jumps into the water to drink it, and all of a sudden he hears this voice. And there's no one around, and he can't figure out where this voice is coming from, just like the rest of the brothers couldn't figure out where this voice is coming from. And the voice says, do not drink the water, this is what happened to your brothers, answer my questions, this is my pond, and once you've answered the questions to my satisfaction, then I will let you drink the water. And Yudhishthira, being the smart eldest brother, figured out that this is probably the voice of a Yaksha. And a Yaksha in the Sanskrit and Indian mythology is a forest spirit. And most likely this forest spirit was dwelling within the body of one of these cranes that the first brother had seen all over the pond. But it wasn't immediately apparent where this voice was coming from, and Yudhishthira thinks to himself and gathers himself, and despite the fact that he also has an incredible amount of thirst, he decides not to drink the water and says, fine, ask me the questions. And the Yaksha, the spirit, starts asking him all of these philosophical questions, and Yudhishthira is being tested and has to answer all of these questions. Questions like, who accompanies a man in death? And the answer is Dharma. That alone accompanies the soul in its solitary journey after death. What is happiness? Happiness is the result of good conduct. And so you see, you get all these different type of philosophical, moral questions that are being tested. And after all of these different questions, Yudhishthira successfully answers them, and the Yaksha is very pleased and says, good, you may revive one brother, who is it that you choose? And Yudhishthira chooses the first brother. And the spirit kind of asks, why did you choose the first brother? Because he knows that some of the other brothers, including Arjuna, which is who we know from the Bhagavad Gita, and one of the other brothers, they're stronger, they're more known as warriors, they're more protective and useful to have around. So why wouldn't Yudhishthira pick some of these stronger brothers? And Yudhishthira responds that it was right to save the first brother because the first brother has a different mother, and the other two brothers had the same mother as Yudhishthira, so he saved the first brother so that each mother could have a son still survive. And that was a good karma, dharmic type answer, and the spirit was very pleased and says, very good, you clearly understand and have done your spiritual work. You can now have all of your brothers back. And he gives back to life all of the brothers. At this time, he also, this Yaksha, this spirit, reveals himself to be Yudhishthira's father. And Yudhishthira's father happens to be Lord Yama, who is known as the Lord of Death and also the Lord of Dharma, living one's purpose. And it's said that Yama was the first mortal man to die, and thus he was automatically kind of given the job of guiding people through the journey of death into the afterworld. And as the Lord of Dharma, it was Yama also who was in charge of helping guide and giving each individual on earth the power to follow their own path, which is an amazing quality that we have as human beings, the ability to follow our own unique path. And that's what this concept of dharma is in yoga. We've got this story where Yudhishthira meets his father, the Lord of Death, who has been hidden and cloaked in the body of a crane, in the spirit of a yuksha, a forest spirit, testing his oldest son to make sure that he has been doing his spiritual work. And we have this posture, this crane posture. We think about cranes, we think about very regal beings, but we're testing death. And in the posture crane, we put our elbows up high, as high up into our armpits as we can. Physiologically in our body, we have a lot of lymph sitting in our armpits. Lymph is an immune system component in our body. We need the lymph to help save our immune system and keep our immune system strong. But the lymph doesn't have a pump. We have to move or manually stimulate the body through things like massage to get the lymph moving and to keep our immune system strong. When we come into crane, we put our elbows close up to the armpits, we stimulate some of that lymph, we get it moving, we cheat death. We think about cranes as being these regal beings. They're very patient, just like Yudhishthira was very patient. And when we look at the qualities of cranes, they're also extremely, although they are territorial, they tend to stay in their territory and they respect their territory. So they don't go in and take what is not theirs. Cranes are patient. Crows, they kind of go around the horizon and they look all over the place, and they are kind of greedy, right? They go down all together and they're grabbing all of the food that they find on the road, even if they didn't kill it. Cranes, on the other hand, they're very patient, they're very regal, they stand very still, and then they go and they get their prey, the fish in the water. They wait for their food to come to them. Death waits for us to come to it, unless we cheat it, unless we live our spiritual path, we live our dharma, we do our spiritual work, we move the body, we do the right thing, and we respect good and right conduct in our life. So crane, the shape of a crane, when you think about it, it's got kind of a big body and a long neck and long legs. And so crane is when the hips are really high and we have this kind of angled-like position. So we can start from a malasana, a frog squat again. We can place the palms of the hands on the ground, but now I want you to lift the hips up and place the knees right on the back of the triceps, and that's where we create that massage of the knees into the armpits where there's that lymph. We bring the weight forward, we lift the hips up high, you engage through the core, gaze down, and from there lift the toes up towards the ceiling. So this is where the hips are high, the head stays down, we are patient, we remember to breathe, we think about dharma and our path in life, we do not try and take from others, we allow ourselves to be just where we are. And then we slowly come on down. So when we think about the posture crow and the posture crane, crow, kakasana, is an arm balance. We're balancing on our hands. And although we're also balancing on our hands in crane and bakasana, because our hips are higher than our heart, it's considered an inversion. They're fun postures to practice. Sometimes we can consider them party tricks. In terms of inversions and arm balances, they tend to be generally more accessible than others, so they're nice starter postures for people who are just beginning a yoga practice. And the most important thing about these postures are embodying the qualities of the crane and of the crow. And not just the birds, but when we understand the meaning and the powerful story of Basunda, the crow, the immortal crow living on the magic tree on Mount Meru, who has figured out how to live a long life by releasing all attachments and aversions, by allowing things to be as they are, by not getting worried about anxiety, the past, the future, by staying present, and by focusing and contemplating the breath. We have these beautiful qualities that we can incorporate into our own practice of the arm balance, getting over that fear of bringing the weight forward, finding equanimity and lightness in flight. And we have the qualities of the story from the Mahabharata with Yudhishthira and the Pandava brothers and the crane, Bakasana. and the Yuksha. So there we have the importance of Dharma, following our own path, trusting in ourselves and in that path, even if that path tests us, staying true to ourselves and good conduct. And there's a little bit of a trickster in there too, cheating death by following that path and by doing the right thing and by breathing and staying present and being patient. So I hope that learning the stories behind Basunda the crow, where this Kakasana came from, and Udisthira, the Padava brothers in the Mahabharata, and where this posture Bakasana, crane, came from, you can use these qualities to help inform your own practice of crow and crane. And if you're a teacher, please, please call crow, crow, and crane, crane. Understand the difference and teach this to your students. The story is so powerful, the qualities are so powerful, and it brings so much more meaning and excitement to these postures. It makes them so much more relevant than just shapes and physiological biomechanical tricks that we can do in our body. These stories, this meaning, these qualities is what makes these postures yoga postures. If you have any questions, please let me know. Again, these books are the Yogi Vashista, where we learned about crow, and Mahabharata, where we learned about crane. Thank you for staying with me and for listening, and I'll be with you again soon. Namaste.